Welcome to the Subcommittee on Energy and Environment and this very important hearing. As early as next week, the House will vote on legislation to strengthen the oversight of financial derivatives markets. This legislation provides the Commodities Futures Trading Commission a broad new authority to regulate over-the-counter trading in derivatives. This reform is long overdue. Over the past 2 years, we have once again learned the hard way that deregulation of financial markets is a recipe for robbery and ultimately recession. I have long supported tough regulation of derivatives beginning in the late 1980s when I chaired what was then the Subcommittee on Telecommunications and Finance. In the early 1990s, I chaired the first congressional hearings on the potential for over-the-counter derivatives to create systemic risk in global financial markets. And I warned of the risk that unregulated derivative dealers like AIG and Bear Stearns could pose for those markets. I've also worked to strengthen competition and oversight in electricity markets. I was the author of the transmission access provisions of the Energy Policy Act of 1992, which promoted competition by requiring transmission owners to provide independent power providers with access to the grid. In the Energy Policy Act of 2005, I was amongst the principal supporters of the provision that gave the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission authority to protect against fraud and manipulation in electricity and natural gas markets. So today's hearing isn't about whether or not we need strong oversight of energy markets. Clearly, we do. It's about getting regulation right. We must ensure that financial regulatory reform doesn't disrupt FERC's ability to properly structure and oversee organized energy markets. Otherwise, we will undermine FERC's ability to ensure reliable and affordable service for American consumers. We must not let this effort to solve one crisis create yet another. The derivatives bill reported by the Agriculture Committee threatens to do just that. The bill's definition of swap is so broad that it is likely to cover a number of FERC-related products, including, but not limited to, financial transmission rights that play a key role in the functioning of the organized electricity markets. These products are inextricably linked to the physical operation of the grid, and they exist only because FERC has approved their terms and conditions. Congress has given FERC strong authority to protect against manipulation of these markets, and there is broad agreement that FERC has exercised that authority thoroughly and competently. Nevertheless, under the pending derivatives bill, anything that falls within the definition of a swap is under the exclusive jurisdiction of the CFTC. And CFTC has no authority to exempt any swap from the full set of regulations that apply to financial markets. What's the upshot of all this? Well, FERC could be excluded from regulating the very markets it has created to ensure a reliable and affordable supply of electricity. In FERC's place would be substituted the CFTC, an agency with no expertise in this area. Such an outcome is unacceptable. Chairman Waxman and I have proposed a straightforward and reasonable solution. First, the derivatives legislation should fully preserve FERC's existing statutory authority. Second, whether FERC and CFTC have overlapping authority, the two agencies should conclude a memorandum of understanding that sets the boundaries of their respective authority so as to ensure effective regulation. And third, in any area where the two agencies agree that FERC should have primacy, CFTC should be allowed to decline to exercise its regulatory authority. We will be working in the coming days to ensure that a resolution along these lines can be reached before the derivatives bill is brought to the House floor. We expect that the members of the subcommittee and the full committee will play an active role in this discussion. This afternoon's hearings will help us to flesh out the issues and potential solutions. I thank the witnesses for their participation, especially the two chairmen who are sitting in front of us. They are working hard in trying to find a way of resolving these issues. We appreciate their efforts. Let me now turn and recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just because the hearing started late, I want to defer my opening statement. I'll defer to Mr. Shimkus.
Gentleman is recognized for that purpose.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank my friend Fred Upton. I've got to go over to the Capitol for a meeting on the Illinois Gitmo. So that's where I'm headed from here. Thousands of companies use derivatives to manage risk. There are winners and losers in the market. One aspect of this bill is transparency, and I'll focus on, does this bill achieve this at the cost of the marketplace? With this bill that the Ways and Means and Ag have both passed, are we making it more difficult for these companies to manage risk? I've talked with many, and this will cost them more, and prices will go up. Will the CFTC and FERC both have jurisdiction? Will it be shared? One has in some instances, one in others. Does this bill make this clear, or is this burdensome with the CFTC and the FERC or companies dealing in derivatives? Are any of these completely capable of this request, and can they afford new costs placed upon them? This is an important hearing, Mr. Chairman. We need to fix the agencies. We don't need to create new ones. And we'll be focusing on that. And I yield back my time. I thank Fred for the yielding.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the chairman of the full committee, gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Today we're examining whether the derivatives reform legislation reported out of the House Agriculture Committee could disrupt the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's current regulation of critical regional electricity markets. The pending legislation is intended to bring greater transparency and accountability to derivative markets. I absolutely support that goal. However, the bill's broad definition of swaps is so inclusive that it threatens to displace comprehensive FERC regulation over regional electricity market products. The bill could be read to assign exclusive and mandatory authority over those products to the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. In 2000 and 2001, California experienced a severe energy crisis. There were blackouts, there was economic chaos, energy prices in the state skyrocketed. We were being victimized by unscrupulous traders in bulk power and transmission rights. FERC at the time was soundly asleep and unresponsive to the alarms we raised. But in the wake of that California energy crisis, Congress amended, and Mr. Markey indicated he was the author, changes in the Federal Power Act to give FERC authority to prevent and punish fraud and market manipulation. We thought FERC had that authority, but during that period of time, they claimed they needed clearer statutory authority. Well, if the legislation reported out of the Agriculture Committee is not adjusted to preserve the authority of FERC, it could undermine authorities that Congress gave FERC in the aftermath of that energy crisis to investigate and penalize market manipulation. FERC has strengthened its monitoring and enforcement practices. No one, including the CFTC or sponsors of H.R. 3795, has suggested to us that the current regulatory regime to prevent market manipulation or abuse in FERC's organized regional markets is broken. So we need to ensure that efforts to strengthen derivative regulation don't weaken existing regulation. Before H.R. 3795 is considered on the House floor, members need to understand how it would affect the organized regional markets FERC has created and comprehensively regulated pursuant to detailed tariffs. These markets not only exist because FERC created them, the products traded in these markets are directly linked to the physical limits of the transmission system and are not traded on broad exchanges. We need to make sure that the legislation doesn't unintentionally displace FERC as a regulator of the markets FERC has created. Well, this hearing is an important opportunity for us to find out what impact the proposed legislation may have on these critical markets and what changes to the legislation may be appropriate. I appreciate the expert witnesses here to help us understand its implications. Our committee has a tradition of acting only on the basis of a thorough understanding of the issues before it, and I believe we can help to improve H.R. 3795 before it is voted upon. And I believe that we're going to need changes in that legislation that's reported out of the Agriculture Committee to make sure that we don't have consequences that would be harmful to what the good job that FERC is doing in this regard and should continue to be able to do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair once again recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate having this important hearing today. We have two very distinguished panels, and we're fortunate to be able to hear their thoughts and concerns with the legislation. H.R. 3795, as reported out of the Ag Committee, has some serious flaws that would negatively impact the energy sector, and I, like many members of this subcommittee, oppose the legislation in its current form. And it's my understanding that both Mr. Waxman, Mr. Markey, Mr. Barton do share my concerns, and I hope that we can work together to change the bill before it is brought to the House floor as early as next week. As written, H.R. 3795 could lead to an increased energy cost for all Americans and disrupt our nation's energy markets. By limiting access to certain risk management tools, as this legislation does, the ability of energy providers to hedge their market risks would be jeopardized and their customers would be vulnerable to increased price volatility. I understand that there is an appetite among many of my colleagues to create new regulations to curb systemic risk in the economy as a whole, but this legislation engulfs markets that are working properly, and in doing so creates new problems that our economy and energy consumers do not need during these very difficult times. Legislation will undermine authorities that Congress gave FERC to investigate and penalize market manipulation. As part of the Energy Policy Act of 2005, FERC was given the authority to protect electric and natural gas markets against manipulation or fraud by ensuring that the transparency of those markets. FERC's ability to exercise these authorities to the full extent Congress intended would be in question with the passage of this bill. Additionally, under current law, FERC regulates the interstate transmission and sale of electricity to ensure that electricity prices are just and reasonable. However, this legislation would disrupt transmissions markets by creating what would amount to contradictory regulation by the CFTC. So this bill, H.R. 3795, in current form, I don't believe is ready for prime time. And I would hope that in the tough times of double-digit unemployment and a sagging economy, as we try to get our businesses back to work and employing folks, that this legislation will not move as it is. Let's work together to get it right. I look forward to the testimony and questions, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell. I recall vividly the gentleman from Michigan back in 2005 in the energy conference, fighting vigorously in that conference committee to ensure that the anti-fraud, anti-manipulation language was included in that legislation, and to a very large extent that's at the core now of what we are debating. So since I have a vivid memory of that battle, and it was the gentleman from Michigan who was leading the fight. I yield him the time for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I very much appreciate your kind remarks. I will commend you for holding this hearing, which I view as very important. If H.R. 3795, the Over-the-Counter Derivatives Market Act of 2009, is acted upon without significant input from the Committee on Energy and Commerce, much of the work that has been done by this committee over the years, going back to before I was in this body, and back when Sam Rayburn was Speaker, will be undone. And FERC will probably lose significant authority to protect electric and natural gas markets against fraud and manipulation. And worse than that, consumers will be denied protection of a consumer protection agency in favor of an agency that has a long tradition of failure in protecting consumers. So thank you for doing this hearing today, Mr. Chairman. Most recently, in the Energy Policy Act of 2005, as you mentioned, the Congress, acting on the suggestions of this committee, gave broad authorities to FERC to protect against fraud and market manipulation, to ensure price transparency in the electricity and natural gas markets. That has worked well, and I look forward to hearing from Chairman Wellinghoff of FERC on the various oversight mechanisms that FERC has in place to ensure proper functioning of various markets. Collaterally, we will look forward to hearing our other witness tell us why it is that he can do better. If H.R. 3795 were enacted into law without further amendment, there is a serious potential that many of the instruments used and organized in regional electric markets and currently regulated by FERC would either be displaced by the Commodities Future Trading Commission or confusing overlaps and conflicts would be created. In the past, such conflicts have led to FTC and a hedge fund jointly litigating to strip FERC of its consumer protection authorities. This would not seem to be beneficial then to consumers, and it has been a matter of bipartisan concern, as today's record will show. In fact, one of our witnesses today will testify that consumers would see a rate increase of 5 to 15% if these activities are forced into exchanges. Following the energy bubble price in natural gas and electricity markets during 2008, FERC economists found that this was caused in significant part by excessive speculation in futures and derivatives market for natural gas. We will want to hear from the chairman of CFTC what they did about those matters at that time. Likewise, it was FERC that discovered a sharp spike in speculative activity in natural gas futures that led to the prosecution of the hedge fund Amaranth Advisors. FERC's admission is simple: assist consumers in obtaining reliable, efficient, and energy services at a reasonable cost through appropriate regulatory and market mechanisms. However, when one considers the complexity of such task, it is critically important that the agency, with years of experience and understanding of energy markets and a fine staff expertise required to carry out such a task, should be allowed to continue its successful work. We will also want to inquire as to why we have need of new intrusion into these matters by an agency without any prior expertise in these matters. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, great. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think the consensus on both sides that FERC has done a good job of closely regulating and monitoring the regional transmission organizations and independent systems operator through the use of tariffs and audits and investigations. And they should, I think the consensus is at least both parties here, that they should remain the sole regulatory authority over such markets. However, obviously this bill acts in such a way to establish a new, I believe, overly expansive definition of swap that would give the Commodity Futures Trading Commission this exclusive authority over a number of transactions that are already extensively regulated by FERC. Now, the regulation by FERC for 15 years here has been successful. And my colleagues, the products that they regulate did not contribute to the meltdown, so it's not clear to me why we're moving forward on this. We all agree that transparency is important. Accountability and stability in the nation's financial market is important to minimize systematic risk and prevent another financial crisis. But the organized power markets and the FERC regulatory system did not cause this meltdown. Any over-the-counter derivative legislation should address problems associated with unregulated financial derivatives and not inadvertently include FERC regulated markets that do not involve this type of risk that this legislation is proposing. A continued unhindered operation of our energy markets are vital, obviously, to meeting our electricity needs of millions of Americans. And obviously, many of us don't see there's a need for a major shift in the oversight of these markets. So I think, Mr. Chairman, you and Mr. Waxman and Mr. Upton have all voiced this clearly, and I think that it's very good that we have a hearing and confirm what we all believe.
We thank the gentleman very much. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing and inviting all of the important stakeholders to provide their testimony today. In particular, I'm happy to see Vincent Duane from PJM here today. As you know, PJM is the regional transmission organization that keeps the lights on in my district, and I think it's important to get their input on how this bill will affect them. I'm glad we're holding this hearing today to bring attention to some potentially unintended consequences of reforming our financial regulatory system. It was only a year ago that our financial system was on the edge of grinding to a halt. Though there were many contributing factors, lack of regulations in our commodities market undoubtedly added to the problem. I applaud my colleagues, the Chairman of the House Financial Services and Agriculture Committee, for their work on this legislation to remedy the poor regulation of over-the-counter derivatives and force irresponsible speculators out of the market. However, in their attempt to be thorough, I'm concerned that my colleagues have overlooked the duplicative effect that this bill could have on energy markets at the end of the day, ratepayers also. Since the creation of regional transmission organizations, FERC has had a responsibility to monitor energy markets in each RTO and review and report on any hint of manipulation or abuse. In fact, with the passage of EPAC 2005, we gave FERC even greater authority to protect against fraud and abuse in electricity and natural gas markets. Let me be clear, we need to clean up our financial derivatives markets, and I think this bill does a good job of getting us there. The CFTC needs to increase oversight and control of these financial products and bring more transparency to the swaps market. We just need to be sure that it doesn't inadvertently require our RTOs to endure another layer of regulation that would keep them from providing electricity to consumers at competitive rates. I look forward to the testimony from all our distinguished witnesses and hope that we can produce an excellent bill to bring to the floor. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back my time.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm strongly in favor of pursuing policies that prevent another financial market collapse from occurring, and I strongly support increasing transparency and oversight in our financial markets. However, I have serious concerns about provisions in this bill that will raise utility costs on every American family and will ship thousands more American jobs overseas. Derivatives serve many purposes, including stabilizing prices and ensuring future deliveries of commodities. Market participants also use derivatives to ensure that consumers are protected from sudden price hikes and other events, including natural disasters, that could negatively impact costs. While I support increasing oversight and transparency to rein in the large financial institutions which contributed to the current economic crisis, we need to make sure to consider the effects on those who played by the rules. Mr. Chairman, as with cap and trade and other reckless policies, these proposals would kill American jobs and increase costs for businesses and families across this country. From the perspective of my position on this committee, I have serious concerns about the utility rate hikes that will result from provisions in this bill. But it doesn't stop there. We're seeing a dangerous trend with this administration and the Democrats running Congress. Provisions in this bill will have serious negative impacts on our economy, and these proposals, taken with the cap and trade energy tax and the government takeover of health care, will prohibit our small businesses, those very job creators in our country, from getting our economy back on track. These reckless policies will result in billions of dollars in new taxes on American families, millions of American jobs lost and shipped overseas, and the destruction of our economy. In this current economic crisis, our focus should be on creating new jobs, not more reckless policy that run jobs out of our country. Again, Mr. Chairman, I'm strongly in favor of pursuing policies to prevent bad players from bringing down our markets in the future, and I believe that oversight and transparency are key components to that goal. The American people are asking, where are the jobs? And all they get from this tone-deaf Congress are more radical schemes that raise taxes on American families and run more jobs out of our country. Enough is enough. Thank you, and I yield back.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. Gentlelady from California, Ms. Mitsui.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling today's hearing. I'd like to thank today's panelists for joining us today to discuss legislation that would affect FERC's jurisdictional markets and the transactions and products created for use in these regulated markets. I look forward to hearing all of your expert opinions. The expertise you share here will be useful throughout the committee process as we continue to discuss these matters. I think all of us here would agree that the recent financial crisis reveals serious weaknesses in the U.S. financial regulation. While it is critical that we respond to the risky trading strategies that nearly brought the American economy to the brink of collapse, it is equally crucial that we acknowledge the potential effects that legislative efforts to improve transparency and stability in over-the-counter derivatives markets may have on our energy markets, particularly electricity and natural gas. Toward this end, I believe that it is important to note that electric utilities and other stakeholders have expressed serious concerns about providing the CFTC the authority already possessed by FERC to regulate regional electric markets. In my district, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, SMUD, enters into natural gas supply contracts and OTC derivative agreements to reduce Sacramento's exposure to price volatility. Unfortunately, most Californians vividly recall at the beginning of this decade the rationing of electricity, which led to an artificial scarcity that created opportunities for market manipulation by energy speculators. We cannot allow our best intentions to examine regulatory authorities to impair the ability of utilities to employ tools to manage price risk and help keep rates affordable for consumers. And we need to continually examine systemic risk and the implications of applying certain means of transparency to the derivatives markets. I look forward to hearing from the panelists on the bill before us today and working with the committee and stakeholders on these important matters. Once again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for highlighting this important topic. I yield back the balance of my time.
Great. Thank the gentlelady. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for convening this important hearing. I am not an expert on these matters. I've tried to learn as much as I can, but from what I can understand, these products minimize risk in a capricious system for end users. Unfortunately, excessive over-the-counter trading by speculators continues to increase the risk for system irregularity and unpredictability. I am pleased, given the number of important domestic priorities vying for our attention, that Congress is paying close attention to reforming the way we regulate derivatives. We simply cannot afford the risk of allowing the system to operate like an open casino, and I appreciate the work thus far done on this bill by the two committees. Still, as the chairman stated, it is critical that this subcommittee question the imprecise definitions in the bill, given the potential problems such ambiguity would create for end users. Last year, the newspaper in my district reported on the importance of derivatives for one of North Carolina's largest utilities, Progress Energy. A man, round-the-clock, Progress power traders make OTC trades to hedge against risk and find the lowest energy prices that are available. These activities are critically important to minimize risk. According to our State Utility Commission officials interviewed in the article, electricity rates would be at least double, that is double, without the success of Progress's trading department. I mention this to illustrate just how critical these financial instruments are in controlling costs for consumers. I welcome and encourage the transparency this legislation would create, and I'm hopeful that the legislation will be crafted in a way that that ensures that end users can continue to enjoy these cost-cutting benefits. I look forward and thank the witnesses for their testimony today. And this microphone is not working.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welsh. Great. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee.
Oh,
I'm sorry, Mr. I had a obstructed view here. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening today's important hearing on the potential impacts of H.R. 3795 on energy markets. Reforms to our financial regulatory system will affect energy sector and consumers, and I appreciate the opportunity to hear the perspective provided by our witnesses today. As Congress proceeds with financial regulatory reform, it's important that we avoid creating unnecessary bureaucratic or jurisdictional impediments. We should build on the regulatory processes that are functioning well, while at the same time fixing flaws in the system. I'm committed to working with my colleagues, with outside experts, with energy stakeholders to ensure that reforms increase transparency, protect consumers, and allow businesses to grow and hire new workers. We should also carefully examine the potential consequences that legislative proposals pose for derivatives end users, who represent a broad spectrum of businesses across America. And with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee.
I'll waive. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And all members of the subcommittee have completed their opening statements, and by unanimous consent, we'll recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Stupak to make an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your courtesy, but I'll waive this with my opening statement.
Great. Well, we thank the gentleman for that. So we'll turn to our very distinguished panel and recognize our first witness, Chairman John Wellinghoff of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. As the head of FERC, Chairman Wellinghoff oversees wholesale electricity transactions and interstate electric transmission in the United States, amongst other matters. He has been a member of the Commission since 2006 and was appointed chairman by President Obama in March of this year. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, sir. Whenever you feel comfortable, please begin.
Good afternoon, Chairman Markey.
If you could move that microphone down a little bit closer to you.
We'll do that. I think it's on. Chairman Markey, Chairman Waxman, Ranking Member Upton, and members of the subcommittee. I'd ask that my full testimony be submitted for the record.
Without objection,
And I
it will be included.
Thank you. And I'll summarize as follows. Organized wholesale electric markets are currently operated by independent entities called regional transmission organizations or independent system operators that are legally considered to be public utilities and fully under the jurisdiction of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. FERC fully and comprehensively regulates these wholesale electric markets and all products traded in those markets. That regulation extends both to the organization of those markets through thousands of pages of market tariffs and rules specifically and exclusively approved by FERC, and to their operation through FERC's extensive oversight, monitoring, and enforcement. The products in those markets are intentionally linked in a structure established by FERC in integrated market design that is intended to ensure that rates and services in those markets are just and reasonable. In addition to ensuring that market participants do not engage in market manipulation and fraud, only FERC has a congressional mandate to ensure that rates charged and the services provided in these markets are just and reasonable. Duplicative oversight and enforcement in the RTO electric markets by the CFTC would create market uncertainty and the potential for disruption of market structures such that rates and services could no longer be found by FERC to be just and reasonable. Further, such duplication would result in market inefficiencies and higher costs for consumers through higher costs of capital and additional regulatory expense. Interposing a new regulator unfamiliar with the purpose and dynamic structure of these markets would not serve the public interest. Last month, Chairman Gensler testified that giving the Federal Reserve certain authority in financial markets has, quote, the potential of setting up multiple regulators overseeing markets and market functions in the United States, end quote. He also stated that, quote, while it is important to enhance the oversight of markets by both the SEC and the CFTC, I think Congress would want to closely consider whether it is best to set up multiple regulators for some functions, end quote. The context of today's hearing is different, but the concern is the same. Any improvements warranted in the RTO and ISO markets can be made by FERC. Interposing a new regulator or having multiple regulators has not been justified, is not needed, and would be harmful to the consumers that we all are charged to protect. That completes my summary. I'd be happy to answer any questions of the subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Our next witness is Gary Gensler. He is the chairman of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Chairman Gensler previously served at the United States Department of Treasury as Undersecretary of Domestic Finance during the Clinton administration. And prior to joining Treasury, he worked for 18 years at Goldman Sachs, where he was a partner and co-head of finance. He was sworn in as chairman of the federal, the CFTC in May by President Obama. We welcome you back to the committee, actually, Mr. Chairman. Whenever you feel comfortable, please begin.
Mr. Chairman, again, if my full statement could be in the record.
Without objection, it will be included at the appropriate.
Chairman Markey, Ranking Member Upton, Chairman Waxman, it is good to be back here. I believe about 10 years ago I was in front of this committee or the full committee. And I thank you for inviting me to testify regarding regulation of the over-the-counter derivatives markets, particularly with respect to energy markets. If I might, just before I turn to that, discuss a little bit what the CFTC is and what we do as an agency. We oversee, as you know, risk management contracts called futures. We regulate these markets to ensure market integrity, protect against fraud and manipulation, promote transparency of the price discovery function to help lower risk to the American public. We have broad surveillance and enforcement powers and regulate, of course, exchanges, clearinghouses, and then the intermediaries that bring transactions there. The CFTC's exclusive jurisdictions over the futures markets coexist alongside other agencies' jurisdiction for underlying commodities. For instance, the Department of Agriculture regulates marketing standards for corn and cash milk prices. And the CFTC regulates corn and milk futures. The Treasury Department oversees the issuance of all Treasury bills, notes, and bonds. Well, of course, the CFTC oversees Treasury futures. And the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission oversees many elements of the energy markets that this committee is familiar with, including natural gas pipelines and electricity markets, while the CFTC oversees natural gas and electricity futures. So we live and coexist along other federal regulators. The CFTC currently oversees futures trading in crude oil, natural gas, electricity, and other energy products, gasoline and RBOB and so forth. Just to give an example, so far this year, futures equivalent to 114 billion barrels of oil have traded with a notional amount of nearly $7 trillion this year on the futures exchanges that we oversee. Natural gas, a similar number would be nearly $1.6 trillion of notional amount of natural gas futures. Electricity actually has futures on the NYMEX, on ICE, and on a small exchange you might not have heard of, the Nodal Exchange, outside of this RTO issue, that, again, we oversee some of these futures markets. And there's about 23 million contracts have traded. It's about 7% of the overall energy futures market is actually in electricity markets. Now, the over-the-counter derivatives market is that which is currently not regulated by FERC, by the CFTC, by any other federal regulator, and we believe that that's certainly part of the crisis last year, not the only part of the crisis, but that we need broad reform in the over-the-counter derivatives market, and it's currently out of sight of federal regulators. As Congress considers this, I believe there's two principal goals: to lower risk to the American public and promote transparency to the American public. And statutory exemptions can undermine those two principal goals as we move forward, and as we've seen sometimes in the past, can lead to unintended consequences. In terms of transparency, 4 quick things. One, the administration has proposed that all standardized derivative transactions be moved onto regulated, transparent exchanges. This allows for every treasurer, every assistant treasurer of a corporation to see where the real-time trading has happened in standard contracts. Customized transactions should still be allowed, but the dealers would be subject to comprehensive regulation. 2, all non-cleared transactions, those too customized to be on those exchanges, should be in a trade repository, and the regulators should be able to see those trades. 3, data on that over-the-counter derivatives market should be aggregated and made public, as we do weekly in the futures market. And 4th, stringent record-keeping and reporting should be established for the swap dealers in these markets. To lower risk in the market, the administration's proposed first that the standard contracts be brought into centralized clearing. There's a very natural debate as to who that covers. Do some end users, are they out of it or into it? But I think that's separate from the transparency debate, because everybody benefits from transparency. Secondly, swap dealers and major swap participants would explicitly have to have capital to back up what they're doing in their swap business. And third, the swap dealer should be required to post and collect margin for individual transactions. And lastly, the CFTC and SEC should be authorized to mandate robust business conduct standards to protect the market integrity, to protect against fraud and manipulation. Over-the-counter derivatives have traditionally not been something that have had any protections against fraud, manipulation, and importantly to this committee, position limit authority. We've proposed, and the administration's proposed, that the over-the-counter energy markets, oil, natural gas, and the like, also have extended position limit authority, aggregate position limit authority. We support that. I thank you for inviting me to testify today. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
We thank you, Chairman Gensler, very much for being here. Chair will recognize himself for a round of questions. Chairman Wellinghoff, the House Agriculture Committee has passed legislation dealing with the subject of derivatives, which has an impact on the FERC. Could you tell us, in your opinion, what is the worst-case scenario that could result from the passage of the House Ag Committee bill without modification?
I think the worst case scenario is one that's been discussed some by some of the members in their opening remarks. If the swaps in that bill are considered to be the exclusive jurisdiction of the CFTC and interpreted to include products in the RTO markets, to the extent that we, in fact, can't regulate and we can't design and develop those markets in ways that ultimately can ensure their functioning, I think it would be virtually impossible for us to ensure that those markets are producing just and reasonable rates. And we talked about one set of products there. There's been some discussion on something called FTRs, financial transmission rights, but that's just one example. There will be a number of other products that are going to be necessary to do things like bring in demand response into the markets, to bring in wind and other renewables into the markets. All those products are ones that will be functioning fully as an integrated whole in the RTO markets. And if we, in fact, can't have authority and jurisdiction over them, but instead the CFTC has that authority, then I think it's likely that those products cannot be fully developed and integrated in a way that will allow us to do things like bring in new renewables, bring in the demand side into the markets.
So if the FERC lost jurisdiction over these products, which are created under the authority of the FERC, would the FERC then have to consider not allowing for the issuance of those products?
Well, certainly, ultimately, we could close down the markets and go back to cost-based regulation. But I don't think anybody wants us to do that, because I think markets also ultimately will produce the efficiencies that we need to move forward towards a low-carbon future. So that's what I'm looking for, the ability to have those markets be flexible, open, transparent, and operated in a way that FERC can ensure that they do produce just and reasonable rates.
Great. Chairman Gensler, how can we avoid that outcome?
Well, Chairman Markey, I believe the CFTC, as it coexists with other federal regulators, whether it's the Agriculture Department or FERC today, can continue to coexist. And we've had good, productive meetings with you and Chairman Waxman and your staffs, Chairman Peterson, on this very issue in the last several days. I think that we need to bring broad reform to the over-the-counter derivatives market. Neither agency currently oversees the over-the-counter derivatives for natural gas, electricity, fuel oil, or any energy product today. We need to bring that into these marketplaces. But at the same time, as you say, to work together with FERC and with your committee staff to ensure that the public is best protected and we continue to coexist and promote the public interest.
Now, analyzing the kind of job that the FERC does right now overseeing these markets, do you see any gap in the work that they do, any under appreciation of dangers that exist in the marketplace that the FERC is not observing?
Well, I wouldn't want to comment on FERC and all of its authorities. They, of course, are very important to the American public, ensuring just and reasonable rates, as the chairman said, and as a rate regulator. Our domain is more as a market regulator to promote market integrity of these derivative marketplace. And so I think each of us right now do not oversee the over-the-counter derivatives marketplace, and that is a gap to the American public.
Chairman Wellinghoff, much of your testimony focuses on the potential for the bill approved by the House Ag Committee to harm RTO markets and mechanisms used in those markets to ensure just and reasonable prices, such as financial transmission rights or forward capacity markets. But isn't there also a risk that this bill could also limit your ability to approve these or other mechanisms in a non-RTO market as well?
Well, we certainly maintain that we don't have regulatory oversight authority per se of the other markets beyond the RTOs, but we do believe that the authority that you gave us in 2005 with respect to fraud and manipulation allows us to look at those participants in those other markets, and to the extent they're acting in those other markets in ways that we determine to be engaging in fraud and manipulation that can, in fact, affect the cash markets in the RTOs that we oversee, we believe we have jurisdiction over that. We want to preserve that as well. We think that's absolutely essential to ensuring that our ability to stop fraud and manipulation in the electric markets has to, and the gas markets we have to have that ability to look into those other areas.
Thank you, Chairman Wellinghoff, very much. And I just want to say to you, Chairman Gensler, your testimony here back in 1998 was very instrumental in ensuring that there was strong privacy protections in what became known as the Graham-Leach-Bliley bill. Almost all the privacy protections emanated from this committee, and your testimony helped enormously for us to be able to construct.
Well, thank you. I remember working well with you then. I look forward to working with you well to bring reform to the over-the-counter markets here as well.
Sir, thank you. Chair recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Upton.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Chairman Wellinghoff, the Energy Policy Act of 2005 gave FERC the anti-manipulation authority over electric and natural gas markets, as you know. And one of the reasons I supported the bill, I thought it was a good provision. Could you give us some examples in which FERC has used the authority to protect consumers over the last couple of years?
I'd be happy to. Thank you. The Commission settled two major manipulation cases in 2009, Amaranth and ETP. We also analyzed other cases and concluded in those that manipulation didn't occur. But we opened over 100 investigations between 2007 and 2009. And an increasing percentage of those are for investigations in market manipulation. In fact, 70% of the investigations opened in fiscal year 2009 were for market manipulation specifically. And in 2009, we recovered $39 million in penalties and $38 million in disgorgement. So we have acted extensively under that authority that you gave us in 2005.
Great. I know this is, a number of us sent a letter to the Speaker. I don't know if you saw this letter. It was dated yesterday. I don't know if you saw it or not. Is it gone? Oh, you haven't seen it. It
That's correct, sir.
Have you heard about the letter?
Just now.
Well, let me I'll make sure. All right, sorry. Chairman Markey outlined in his opening statement what might be a reasonable compromise, at least from this committee's standpoint, as you heard the opening statements from both sides here, as to a process that might be able to work. I think it's all of us, at least that I've heard this afternoon, have indicated that I think the underlying bill does not provide for that at all. And something that Chairman Markey outlined where you'd actually define responsibilities. FERC would, in fact, take sole responsibility on a number of those issues. Might be something that this subcommittee, could support as compared to the underlying bill. Mr. I don't know if this is the first that you've heard of that. It sounds like there have been some discussions. Is that an approach that you think the CFTC could accept and support?
There have been constructive discussions with the chairman directly, both chairs and their staffs, and Chairman Peterson from the House Agriculture Committee and his staff. So I think those have been constructive dialogues. There's been no resolution. I did want to comment one thing about as I understand it, on the manipulation standards that were raised by a number of members in their opening statements. I believe you did as well, Representative Upton. But from what I understand, there's nothing in the swaps bill, the 3795, or as the administration proposed it, that would affect FERC's anti-manipulation authority as outlined in the 2005 Act over its markets, the markets that they oversee, the natural gas and the electricity markets, as you so well put into that bill in 2005. I think what we've been talking a lot with the committee about is this issue of how we coexist, how the CFTC as a market regulator oversees futures and derivatives, while very important functions that FERC oversees the electricity and natural gas markets as are, for just and reasonable rates in the electricity markets is, and so forth, how we coexist and bring the best to the American public, particularly the thing that's been at the focus is these financial transmission rights that have been raised by a number of members.
Mr. Wellinghoff, I know that you've not been chairman of FERC for all that long, but if you look back to when we gave FERC the authority in the Energy Policy Act of '05. Are there things that the FERC might have done differently in terms of the role that they've played?
I'm not sure that there are things that we could have done differently. Fortunately, you'll have another FERC chairman before you later on, Betsy Moeller, former FERC chairman, so you might want to ask that question to her as well. But I give Betsy a little question. Certainly, I'll tell you that authority in 2005 was tremendously helpful to us with respect to the ability to go in and investigate fraud and manipulation and ensure that it wasn't ongoing. I think FERC prior to 2005 did have some tools in its toolbox. I'm not sure that they used them all to the extent that they should have, but I'm not going to sit here post-judging a prior commissioner, prior chairman. But certainly in hindsight, there probably are some things that could have been done.
Okay.
I can't give you any specifics, though.
Time's expired.
John's time has expired. Chair recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Waxman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 1999, Californians paid $7.4 billion for wholesale electricity. A year later, those costs rose 277% to $27.1 billion. So it was clear these prices were the result of deliberate market manipulation and fraud. That gave rise to the legislation that has been referred to a number of times. Now, Chairman Gensler, you just said you don't think that the bill would interfere with FERC enforcing that law. Is that your position?
As I understand it, the 2005 Act, which granted the anti-manipulation authorities that have been referred to by many members, I'm not aware of something in 3795, nothing in that swaps bill that I'm reading carefully because the general counsel for the CFTC wrote this anyway, but that it wouldn't affect FERC's anti-manipulation authority under that act over the markets that they oversee. As you mentioned, the electricity crisis, I do think that one of the important lessons out of the Enron crisis and the electricity crisis, which was then complemented in a bad way with this terrible crisis last year, is that we have to bring reform to the entire over-the-counter derivatives market and not have an exception, for instance, for some part of the over-the-counter derivatives marketplace.
Well, I don't disagree that we need regulation in light of the experience we've had where there was no cop on the beat in these over-the-counter trades. But as I read H.R. 3795, I think there's a very good chance that RTO products and services regulated under FERC-approved rules would fall under the definition of a swap. And that means that CFTC would have exclusive jurisdiction over these products and services. You don't think it means that. Would you disagree with the idea of a clarification that FERC's jurisdiction is not being intruded upon?
Well, I think that's what we're working with you and Chairman Markey and Chairman Peterson hopefully productively on. I do think that the CFTC has an important role to play as a market regulator over derivatives products to ensure market integrity and market transparency, and FERC has a very important public role to play.
If market manipulation or fraud occurred in a FERC-regulated market placed under CFTC's jurisdiction, would the exclusivity clause of the Commodities Exchange Act prevent FERC from exercising its anti-market manipulation authorities? In other words, would FERC regulation be displaced by CFTC regulation? You don't think so, but that's what we're concerned about. I think it needs to be clarified if you don't think, if you agree with us.
Well, I think the anti-manipulation standard that you put in place in the 05 Act, which talked about in connection with the physical markets, that the natural gas markets and the electricity markets, similar to how we coexist with the Agriculture Department that has many authorities in the agricultural markets.
Well, you coexist now with FERC, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the question is, well, let me ask Chairman Willinghoff, what do you think of the possibility, given the way this swap is defined, that they may just, some court may come along and say, well, either you both have the regulation or they have the exclusive regulation. Will that?
I think it's a definite concern, not only a concern, but it's a looming one in that in the Amaranth case that we have in part pending, part of that case is still pending. One of the parties was not let out of the case, and we're moving forward with it. But in that case, the CFTC was arguing in court that FERC did not have jurisdiction in the financial market. So it's already cloudy, and I think all we're doing is moving the other direction here with this legislation of making it more cloudy or more certain that the exclusive jurisdiction is on the CFTC side. So we need to ensure that FERC has the ability to go in and do the investigation and have the jurisdiction over the parties that are engaged in the manipulation and fraud. Otherwise, we can't do our job.
Well, the financial reform legislation is important because the financial meltdown demonstrated that there were significant regulatory gaps. But the RTO markets are comprehensively regulated by FERC, and we need to make sure that we don't unintentionally roll back important protections against market manipulation and fraud that are already in the law. And as I pointed out, as a Californian, the reason that law was changed was to plug up the gap. And we filled that gap very clearly by designating FERC as the agency to be responsible. I don't want us now to plug up another gap in regulatory authority by confusing FERC's jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Chairman Gensler?
I was just saying, actually, neither agency right now have jurisdiction over a transaction between a large financial house and a utility company called an over-the-counter derivative in natural gas, heating oil, electricity, where FERC has very clear jurisdiction on the RTOs and to protect the public, where we have very clear jurisdiction on something called a futures market like NYMEX or this intercontinental exchange. We do have some pretty good authorities, and we coexist, but there's a whole world out there, trillions of dollars in notional amount. I quoted big numbers. The over-the-counter market's bigger. And that's where we want to regulate the dealers to lower risk and promote transparency to the American public. And I think we can continue to coexist and work with your staffs to make sure that the FERC doesn't inadvertently or unintentionally be less able to protect the public.
It's not that we're trying to protect FERC. We're trying to make sure the regulation makes sense. And it makes sense for you to regulate futures, but it makes sense for FERC to regulate the manipulation of the markets. And there may be some ambiguity down the line. What do you think ought to be done then? I suppose you two ought to get together and figure it out. But we ought not to start with a law that's so ambiguous that either neither of you will regulate or both of you will regulate. And then it seems to me, Chairman Wellinghoff, if the chair would permit, just one last thing. What do you think the impact would be on the energy markets if there are two regulators they have to respond to?
Well, uncertainty in the markets creates more risk and creates more cost. We've seen that over and over, and that would be the result.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Gensler, if you've done an analysis on the legislation, can you talk about any kind of impact that you've assessed that it would have on energy prices or on energy products?
I think that the legislation, if able to pass with strong transparency initiatives where utility companies, whether small or large, could clearly see where this market trades on a real-time basis, that helps to lower costs. Right now, this market has a significant information deficit where Wall Street benefits and Main Street loses out, frankly. And that's because that small utility company or large utility company can't see on a real-time basis the trades in the over-the-counter natural gas marketplace, the over-the-counter coal marketplace, the over-the-counter electricity marketplace. They can see a lot of transparency on a futures market or in some of the markets that FERC regulates, but not on these over-the-counter. So I think that helps in a significant way. It would also lower the cost to the American public of the crisis that could come when large financial institutions concentrate so much risk and they keep these trades on their books.
Right, and we've talked about the large financial institutions and the problem they have, and the concern that those of us that have opposed this bill have is that it's not necessarily the large folks who actually did the damage, it's the small guys who played by the rules that would be hurt by this. And with that, I would ask Mr. Mr. Wellinghoff, you talked about in your testimony, you actually used the term harmful to consumers. If you can expand on, kind of your take on how this legislation would be harmful to consumers.
Harmful in the sense that if we had two regulators in the space and the industry and the participants in that market were uncertain as to the clarity of that regulation, which they certainly could be if you had two regulators with conflicting positions, ultimately you're going to increase costs because you're going to do two things. Number one, you're going to increase the cost of equity because risk is going to be increased. Number two, you're going to increase regulatory costs as well. So both of those, all those costs, the consumer pays for everything. All those costs are ultimately going to go to the consumer. Now, I haven't quantified it. I'm willing to accept former Chairman Moeller's numbers that she's presented in her testimony, but we haven't done a specific quantification.
Okay, and then Chairman Gensler, would there be more systemic risk if companies chose not to hedge their risk, and they just thought that the cost would be prohibitive?
Congressman, hedging is a very important part of our economy. We're promoting that in this bill. We're lowering risk to the American public, allowing utilities and energy companies to hedge customized risk. But those risks that are standard enough, for instance, a 2-year risk on natural gas pricing, standard contract, we'd want to move that onto the clearinghouses to lower risk, and very importantly, onto transparent trading venues. And if I might note, I don't think the transparency costs end users. If you didn't know what an apple cost when you walked in a store, does it help you if you have to pay an extra nickel or 10 cents for that apple because you don't know what it cost the prior person walking in the store? I don't think so. We bring every securities transaction and every futures transaction to transparent markets. Why shouldn't we do that in natural gas and electricity over-the-counter markets?
Chairman Wellinghoff, you had mentioned that one of FERC's responsibilities is to ensure that consumers have adequate supplies of energy at reasonable prices.
Correct.
How important is it to you that the responsibility as a core tenet of energy regulatory system is ensuring that reasonable prices exist for consumers?
Well, it's essential, and the only way to have reasonable prices with these RTO markets is to ensure that they're well designed as a structural package, and that's why it's so important to have one entity who oversees that structural package to make certain that the design is adequate to ultimately get to the end result of the reasonable prices. Okay,
and then you'd also talked about, or I think in your testimony, the intensive capital expenditures. The energy industry as a whole is a capital-intensive industry. Could you comment on the role that the FERC-regulated financial products play in securing capital for the development of new technologies, and if that capital is limited by new regulations, what that role would be on the ability to have newer technologies developed?
Certainly, with respect to recovery of investment like in transmission, to the extent that those entities are not able to recover their full investments, they're not going to invest in new technologies, the new smart grid that we need ultimately to move us into the next phase of where we need to go with respect to our energy future.
Thank you. I yield back.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the chairman emeritus of the committee, Mr. Dinkle.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could you move the microphone over a little?
You're right. The legislation would make energy hedging and trading subject to CFTC's exclusive jurisdiction and require that all these transactions be cleared and traded on exchanges. FERC would lose jurisdiction. First of all, of what would you lose jurisdiction?
Well, as I understand it, we would lose jurisdiction over these markets and their operation ultimately.
Would you? What would you be able to do with regard to an RTO that you wanted to, or with regard to an RTO that wanted to put in some new carrying capacity? What would happen with regard to your efforts with regard to dealing with fraud or market manipulation? If you couldn't get at the derivative and you couldn't inquire into the derivative, how would you then be able to conduct a meaningful and complete investigation in those two instances?
Our hands would be tied.
I'm sorry?
Our hands would be tied.
Your hands would be tied. Now, where else would your hands be tied by that provision?
in creating new products for these markets, as I mentioned, by moving forward into things like renewables and energy efficiency, demand response. We're starting to put the demand side into these markets. It's never been done before. It's just started over the last couple of years.
And so the derivatives that would finance this, you would not be able to go into.
That's correct.
And so you would not have any way of knowing whether you had a successful investigation or a rulemaking or rate-making procedure. Is that right?
That's possible,
All right.
yes.
I'm going to submit ask in consent that I be permitted to submit a letter to the Commission following up with some of these questions.
Without objection, so ordered.
Now, what is the problem here, Mr. Wellinghoff, with regard to the situation which brings about this legislation, requiring us to force all of the derivatives into exchanges? And what authority do you lack to address these questions?
I think the issue, as I understand it, is that, again, to the extent that these definition of swaps in the legislation could intrude into the RTO markets, it would, in fact, take away our ability to develop and shape these markets in ways that can ensure that rates are just and reasonable.
No, you wouldn't understand the underlying financing and would have no power whatsoever to go into those questions. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. Now, FERC has stated in its State of the Markets report that natural gas and related electricity costs in the U.S. were driven up in 2008 by flows of funds in the derivatives and financial products, such as futures and swaps, at a time when there was adequate inventories of natural gas. Did the CFTC do an adequate job of regulating excessive speculation at that time?
I'd suggest you ask Chairman Gensler that question.
The answer is what?
I'd suggest you ask Chairman Gensler that question.
Okay. Now, Mr. Gensler, did you do a good job of regulating those matters at that time?
It's good to be back before you again, Representative Dingell.
Let's talk about your agency.
And,
doing an adequate job. The answer to that question is no, is it not?
I keep calling you Chairman, I know, because I'm allowed to. Chairman Emeritus. I came onto the agency in May of this year.
I don't want to know that. Did the agency do an adequate
job? And what I found is the staff of the agency is very strong, and what we've done is we've taken a serious look at bringing back. We've had position limits in the energy space until June of 2001, working with the exchanges. We're looking seriously about bringing them back. I also just wanted to comment.
The answer is you did not do an adequate job. Now, given FERC's pervasive regulation of RTO and ISO markets, is there a regulatory gap in those areas that must be filled by the CFTC? So what is it?
I think there's a significant regulatory gap right now in what's called over-the-counter derivatives. Transactions that are not on an RTO, they're transactions between...
Does that require you to have legislation that excludes the FERC in its entirety from jurisdiction over those kinds?
Currently, the CFTC has exclusive jurisdiction over futures markets, and that's whether it's on NYMEX or and so forth. And I don't think there's any dispute here between our agencies here on that.
But your legislation here would say to it that there could be no inquiry into those matters whatsoever by FERC.
It's not, with all respect, that's not how we read.
Let me finish. So you're going to read that benefit by depriving FERC of any authority to address those questions which might lie under its concern.
Our read of 3795, it does not affect that which you put in place in 2005. And in fact, there's been an exclusion from our statutes since the 1930s that we don't regulate what's called forwards, spot markets or forward markets, what some people call the cash market. So the day-ahead market and the electricity market, all of these are not.
But not responsive. I'd like to hear what CFTC has done to prosecute the excessive speculation that was cited in the FERC State of the Market report regarding natural gas and electricity prices being driven up by flows of funds into derivatives. What have you done about that?
We have a very strong and robust enforcement agency that would bring numerous cases. In fact, the Amaranth case that was earlier referred to, we both brought and settled, and John and I met on that in a very constructive way. We've had their enforcement people working with ours and our enforcement people working with FERC, I think, in a very constructive way, and have a memorandum on understanding which we can build upon.
Now, if you please, Mr. Wellinghoff, please tell us how you will be able to carry out your mission with regard to making the RTOs work, deal with the supply problem, deal with all of your other responsibilities if you don't have authority to get into the derivatives, which are a major part of the financing of all these operations.
I won't, certainly with respect to fraud and manipulation. I need that authority, continue to have that authority to ensure that there is no fraud and manipulation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We thank the chairman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing on this important legislation. Mr. Wellinghoff, I want to ask you, I have some concerns regarding the clarity of H.R. 3795 as to whether it would impact the operation and costs of the federal power marketing administrations and customers. As you know, I'm from the great Northwest state of Oregon, and we do things. We don't necessarily operate under an RTO, but Bonneville has its own trading floor and all. So I'm curious from both of you how your take on this legislation and its effect there. And Mr. Wellinghoff, if you could start, and then maybe Mr. Gensler, if you could comment as well.
Congressman Walton, quite honestly, I haven't looked at it from that perspective. So I don't really want to give you a view from, off the top of my head. I mean, there may be some collateral effects, but I really haven't analyzed it.
Mr. Gensler?
Again, I'm not aware of any, but we'd be glad to work with you and your staff as we're working with Chairman Markey.
Well, I think one of the issues that's been raised is that this should be clear it doesn't cover the physical delivery of commodities such as electric power and gas. And is that clear?
That's right. Just as in the Commodities and Exchange Act for 70-some years, it's not only excluded the physical delivery, but also the forward markets. That's excluded. Similarly, 3795 in the administration approach would exclude the forward, these day-ahead markets, and so forth.
And Mr. Wellinghoff, you concur with that?
Yes.
Analysis. So it's clear that real-time day-ahead term markets for physical delivery of power and gas are not included in coverage of this bill.
That's as we understand it, as well as some of the other forward markets that are well, regulated elsewhere. Anything that has a forward market and has a physical delivery is out.
Okay. Then I just want to ask about your concern, again, raised to me by folks who operate in these markets, about the concern about restriction of capital and limited ability to hedge under this legislation. And from a power perspective, from FERC's perspective, maybe first, what sort of concerns are you hearing? What sort of concerns do you have about this notion that it could restrict capital and limit the ability for some of these concerns to hedge?
People that do hedge certain products in these markets, utilities primarily,
right,
their fuel, have expressed concerns to me. Again, I haven't quantified the effect. I think probably, again, the testimony of former Chairman Mueller goes into that in some great detail and actually does some quantification there that might be helpful to you.
Okay.
I think, Congressman, commercial hedgers have raised two concerns. One is, could they enter into commercially needed but particular tailored transactions that aren't standard? And the answer is an unambiguous yes. But that's a legitimate question they've raised. Some members of the Senate or the House might feel differently, but the administration says yes. Two is, on the standard contracts, they've raised the question is, how is credit priced in there? Will they have to post collateral if it's lowering risk to a clearinghouse? There's some, like myself, I believe that standard transactions should be brought to a clearinghouse to lower risk to the American public. But there's a legitimate public policy debate whether end users, commercial hedgers using these transactions are exempted. The 3795 does exempt them. I've called that it not be exempted, and so that's the public policy debate there. I think even if Congress exempts as commercial end users from the clearing requirement, we should not inadvertently exempt them from the transparency. We can separate that. Congress can write the law that the large financial houses have to bring it into a trading venue, and then everybody gets the benefit of transparency, and then you sidestep the clearing issue.
All right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all the question.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Stupak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wellinghoff, Mr. Dingell indicated your State of the Markets report, and that report strongly indicated that a lack of physical market fundamentals was used in determining the price of natural gas and electricity, and the conclusion was that large pools of capital flowed into these various financial instruments that turn the commodities like natural gas into investment vehicles, as opposed to providing a product there. Does that accurately reflect FERC's current position that financial speculation in the natural gas market has increased prices?
We believe it did at that time. That was one reason we went after Amaranth.
Do you believe that's still going on now? And we've seen a 100% increase in the price of, well, supplies are more than adequate.
Actually, natural gas prices have gone down substantially.
I'm thinking of gasoline. You're right, natural gas.
Natural gas, and that's what we focus on is natural gas. So I don't believe it's occurring now.
Okay. Do you believe that natural gas, so you think natural gas is leveled out then, it's not continuing to be distorted at all?
We have a lot of different dynamics going on in natural gas right now. There's been a tremendous amount of new shale finds in this country and new technology to develop those shales. Shales as well can be more easily shut in than traditional wells and brought back up much quicker. So that dynamic is going to affect the market. That technological dynamic and that resource dynamic is going to have a big effect on the market.
You mentioned Amaranth a couple times, and Mr. Gensley has also too. That started, what, about 1995 when Amaranth started break? When did you start really getting into Amaranth?
I believe it was 2006.
2006?
2007, actually.
Okay, were you going to bring a cease and desist to stop the transaction, or restrain order?
We do not have cease and desist authority.
Is that something you need to?
It would be helpful.
I mean, on Amaranth, that was like $6 billion, wasn't it?
Yes. It would have been extremely helpful in that case.
And what have you been able to recover?
We have recovered. We've recovered $7.5 million.
$7.5 million out of $6 billion.
Well, the total fund was that amount. Yes.
All right. If you had cease and desist, would that assist you? And
that would assist us tremendously. Yes.
Mr. Gensler, let me ask you this: you made a number of statements for Congress on need to keep any end user exemption from centrally clearing swaps as narrow as possible. As the current bill is written, financial institutions that pose systemic risk to the U.S. economy are exempt from clearing swaps if there are a counterparty to an end user. So does CFTC have an estimate of how much of the market will be exempt from the clearing requirement because of this exemption?
It's a very good question. It's hard to determine because there's such darkness or opacity in this market, but it's very significant. The standard part of the market in oil and energy products may well be the standard part of the market.
Standard, right.
Over half of the market is standard enough to be cleared. Right. But then the question is, what portion of that do have end users? Now, and that's a very hard number to get, but it's not in the single-digit percents. I mean, it's a significant portion, and that's why we think at least we should do it to exchanges and, if possible, to clearing.
Well, does the CFTC then believe that Tier 1 financial companies that pose systemic risk to the financial services industry should be exempt from centralized clearing of swaps?
No, I believe strongly that all swaps that are standard enough be brought into clearing and that end users be able to allow to do individual credit arrangements as they do now in these marketplaces. And again, if Congress thinks to exempt them, let's not exempt them from the trading requirement at least.
Okay. Well, we talked a little bit about liquidity too here today. So if we allow the end users to remain exempt, would requiring Tier 1 financial companies to centrally clear swaps on exchange, regardless of their counterparty, provide enough liquidity in the market for pricing and hedging?
I think it does. I think right now these markets are internalized, and there's 5 or 6 large concentrated pools of capital. They're sophisticated. Many Americans wonder as they go home for the holidays why so much money is being made on Wall Street. This is at the core of it. It's not the only reason, but they internalize dark markets. And I I understand that, but I think it's now time, I believe, working with Congress, to bring transparency, as this Congress did with President Roosevelt in the 30s, to the securities and futures markets.
You mentioned OTC, you mentioned ICE, and the Dubai market, has that been up and running now? Or
it's been very small, sir.
Still?
Yeah.
Do you see?
Well, it might develop larger, but right now it's been very small. I just wanted to mention something on an earlier question. Right now, these markets, these financial transmission right markets,
yes,
from the statistics right from the PJM market, about 74% of their transactions are with the large financial houses, the houses you're talking about.
Tier 1.
On dollar value, it's apparently lower. Its transaction volume's high, but over 30% is with the large financial houses. And so they're very, very much participating as speculators in these markets. They provide capital to these markets, important capital, but they're part of these markets as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. I'd just like to ask one final question, then we'll move to the next panel. And ask you this, Chairman Gensler. If the CFTC is doing an anti-fraud or anti-manipulation investigation of oil futures trading on the New York Mercantile Exchange, and you believe that part of the fraudulent scheme may have involved wrongdoing in the cash market, you have the power under the Commodities Exchange Act to extend your investigation to cover that part of the fraud. And you wouldn't want the Congress to deny the CFTC the power to look at transactions in both the NYMEX futures market and the cash market in your own investigation. Is that correct?
As I understand it, our authorities are in the futures market, and that's where it starts. And then if there's other attributes to the...
If it tracks into the cash market.
But it's got to track into the futures market, because that's where our core is.
You would not want your power to track it to be constrained. You would not want your powers to track it from the futures market into the cash market to be constrained.
Well, I don't believe that Congress has constrained it, but it has to start. It has to be in the futures market.
Exactly.
We're a market regulator. We don't regulate the cash markets.
Right. But the opposite, from our perspective, should also be true. In other words, if the FERC finds activities in the cash market that leads it into the futures market, we're basically concerned that they could be constrained in heading in the opposite direction, and that's a problem that is actually being created by this legislation that we're concerned about.
I understand that concern with respect. I don't think 3795 does that with the 2005 provisions, the important provisions that you provided, FERC. We, of course, would not bring an action solely in the cash market. It's got to be in the futures market where we are.
We'd like your comment on this, Chairman Wallinghoff.
Well, I think you put your finger exactly on it, although I'm not sure that the 3795, I think 3795 may exacerbate it, but the situation already exists. As I mentioned, CFTC has, gone into federal court saying we can't go into the futures market in Amaranth, for example, because we don't have jurisdiction there yet. We started in the cash market. We started in the cash market, started our action there, and we were tracking it, trying to track it through into the futures market, and the CFTC says we don't belong there.
So from your perspective, you don't have a problem if the CFTC tracks it into the cash market?
No problem coming to us.
But the CFTC has filed an amicus brief in the Amaranth case saying that they don't want the FERC to be able to track from the cash market into the future.
That's correct.
So that's a problem, it seems to me, in terms of...
There's no comedy there.
Creating comedy between, sister agencies. Mr. Gensler?
I think what was done, an important thing in 2005 that you did, was that in connection with the purchase or sale of natural gas or electricity, subject to the jurisdiction of FERC, that they could pursue fraud manipulation if it was in connection with the purchase or sale of natural gas and electricity in the cash markets, effectively. But the Congress did not expressly in that statute in 2005 expressly say that another federal agency should regulate in the futures market. And of course, back in 1974, Congress had adopted exclusive jurisdiction for the futures market for the CFTC to ensure uniformity and consistency in those derivatives marketplace we call futures.
Okay. You have the last word, Mr. Wellinghoff.
Again, I just think there should be parity there. If they can come from the futures market into the cash market with respect to investigation, we should be able to do the same going from the cash market into the futures market.
I agree with you, Mr. Wellinghoff, but we thank both of you for being here, and we thank both of you for working together with the committee to try to find a peaceful resolution of these issues. And I think if we continue to make the progress that we have in the past couple of days, that we have a good chance of doing so. But it will require good faith on all parties in order to accomplish that goal.
Thank you. It's good to be back with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, both of you. We appreciate it. So this panel has completed its testimony. Would ask the next panel to please come up and take their seats behind their name tags. What's going on? Are we in recess, John?
Yeah. Yeah. Till 4.
We're in recess until 4.
Till 4, and then they're going to have votes. So, you gotta keep an honest gavel.
Yeah, I'm going to end this panel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, welcome back to this panel. This is like Hall of Fame weekend here. We have a lot of, long-time visitors to our committee who are returning for this very important hearing. And we're going to begin by recognizing Betsy Moeller, who is the Executive Vice President for Governmental Affairs and Public Policy at Exelon Corporation. Prior to joining Exelon, Ms. Moeller served as Commissioner on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission from 1988 to 1998, including as Chair from 1993 to 1998. Under her leadership, FERC issued Order Number 888, requiring utilities to open up their transmission lines on an equal access basis to their competitors, paving the way for the development of wholesale competitive electricity marketplaces. She did that pursuant to the Markey Amendment in the 1992 Energy Policy Act. We welcome you back here again, Ms. Moeller. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
We're going to hold you to 5 minutes, each of you, in this round, so please be aware of that just because of the roll calls that are pending out on the House floor and our need to be able to telescope this process in order to make sure that all of the members get a chance to ask questions. So,
unless you want to come back after 6.
So that none of that came out of your time, Ms. Moeller. Please begin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Upton, and members of the subcommittee. It is, believe it or not, a pleasure to be back. I guess it's like a moth in the flame. Exelon is an electric and gas public utility holding company headquartered in Chicago. Our subsidiaries, ComEd in Chicago and Pico Energy in Philadelphia, serve 5.4 million customers, or about 12 million people, more than any other company. Our competitive generation affiliate, Exelon Generation, owns, operates, or controls about 30,000 megawatts of generation. Our nuclear fleet is the largest in the country and the third largest in the world. I am testifying today on behalf of Edison Electric Institute. EEI, as you know, is the trade association of U.S. shareholder-owned electric companies. My testimony today details why utilities use over-the-counter derivatives products, examines the cost to consumers of duplicative regulation of OTC derivatives transactions, and encourages the subcommittee to support amendments to H.R. 3795 to clarify that FERC has and should retain exclusive jurisdiction over organized electricity markets and transactions. We look at H.R. 3795 from the perspective of our customers, who are electric and natural gas consumers. We support the goal of regulatory reform, but do not support the current version of the bill. it would result in costly, duplicative, and overlapping regulation over organized energy markets and higher costs for our customers. In our view, subjecting OTC transactions to additional regulations, to regulators, is simply not warranted because they do not involve or cause the type of systemic risk that the legislation is theoretically designed to deal with. EEI, EPSA, American Gas Association, and 69 other organizations have sent a letter to the members articulating what we believe would be an effective approach to regulating OTC products. In short, the energy industry is united in our belief that this legislation should recognize the clear authority of FERC or the Public Utility Commission of Texas in the case of ERCOT, and exempt all regional transmission organizations or independent system operators, products, and services from regulation by the CFTC. Why? It's simple. Subjecting these types of transactions to additional layers of regulation would be a duplication of effort, impose potential conflicts, engender additional litigation where you have two agencies looking at the same types of transactions and both of them trying to assert jurisdiction over them, and most importantly, cost our customers billions of dollars in higher rates. Your invitation asked me to focus on organized energy markets, the RTOs. Over 65% of Americans, 134 million customers, live in regions served by RTOs and ISOs. It is not a trivial problem. These independent entities operate the electric grid and operate markets. We need to make sure that FERC retains effective authority to regulate RTOs and ISOs. I do not believe that the legislation is clear on this subject. It gives, under the Commodities Exchange Act, where the CFTC has authority over things, they maintain, quote, exclusive authority. I don't see how you can have two exclusive bosses in this area. Nor, I might add, do I believe that it can be dealt with by a memorandum of understanding between the two agencies, because if CFTC has the exclusive authority over these types of transactions, that would at least arguably trump the FERC's jurisdiction. I think that can only be sorted out by statute. We believe that these transactions such as FTRs, swaps, excuse me, and other types of transactions that are routinely entered into as part of RTOs are important consumer protection mechanisms. They reduce electricity costs to our customers, and their authority of the FERC to regulate them should not be in doubt. We believe that any proposed legislation should clarify that FERC is the sole regulatory authority governing the organized RTO or ISO markets and the transactions entered therein. I appreciate very much your offer to have me testify today, and would be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, very much. Our next witness is Patrick McCullough, President and CEO of Delaware Municipal Electric Corporation. He is today testifying on behalf of the American Public Power Association. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Markey, Ranking Member Upton, and members of the subcommittee, I profoundly appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm representing the American Public Power Association, as you said. We represent the interests of more than 2,000 publicly owned, not-for-profit electric utility systems across the country, serving approximately 45 million Americans, and the majority of our systems are serving communities with populations of 10,000 people or less. DMAC, my company, provides generation and other services to 9 municipal distribution utilities in the state of Delaware, and is constituted as both a load-serving entity and a generation owner in the PJM RTO. I have also served as the chairman of the PJM Members Committee, which means I'm very familiar with the markets and processes within the RTO. I also represent, and I often remind my colleagues at PJM, that I represent the folks at the end of the day who write the checks to pay for all these services. And our mission is to make sure those checks are as reasonable as possible for the value received. My statement is going to focus on 3 areas: energy markets in general, the regulatory overlap between FERC and the CFTC, and mandatory clearing of over-the-counter derivative contracts. While energy markets suffer from volatility for many reasons, including storage capacity, weather, and economics, in recent years the price of energy commodities has not been determined solely by these traditional variables. Manipulation and speculation for profit in energy markets have often caused artificially high prices. APPA and DMAC have therefore consistently supported increased transparency in these markets to mitigate market manipulation. For example, APPA passed 2 resolutions last few years in support of increased transparency and regulation in over-the-counter or OTC natural gas markets. Therefore, we support the provisions of H.R. 3795 that enhance transparency in these markets, including reporting by large traders of OTC positions and the application of aggregate speculative position limits. Because of these strong concerns with market manipulation, APPA and DMAC recognize that the CFTC can help to police and prevent manipulation in the energy markets. The CFTC and FERC should work together to prevent manipulation in the energy markets that are run by RTOs, including PJM. However, we urge Congress to avoid creating duplicative authorities between CFTC and FERC over the many other aspects of power supply and transmission markets that are run by the RTOs. In regions with RTOs, market participants buy and sell a variety of electric products and services in the centralized RTO-run markets. One such market is for the purchase and sale of financial transmission rights, or FTRs, which APPA members and other load-serving entities use to hedge the cost of transmission congestion created when moving their power from the generation sources to their retail customers, which is often referred to as load. While these financial transmission rights are financial contracts, their terms, conditions, and rates are comprehensively regulated by FERC, and they should remain under FERC jurisdiction. LSE's access to FTRs is absolutely essential to their ability to serve their retail loads at reasonable rates and with less price volatility. RTO markets are fully regulated by FERC and are set out in FERC-approved tariffs. The rates, terms, and conditions applicable to any RTO product under a FERC tariff should not be subject to concurrent jurisdiction by CFTC. Concurrent jurisdiction could result in inconsistent regulations and uncertainty over the enforceability of transactions. Because of this concern, if concurrent jurisdiction is found, CFTC should be required to consult with FERC regarding these markets and should be given statutory authority to cede jurisdiction to FERC. However, as I mentioned, we recognize CFTC has helped to police and prevent manipulation of prices in energy markets. APPA would therefore support concurrent FERC and CFTC jurisdiction over market manipulation in RTO-administered markets. APPA would urge the 2 agencies to pool their resources and expertise to provide more comprehensive oversight in this specific area. I would also like to mention the critical importance of continuing to allow LSEs and energy end users to use non-cleared, individually negotiated OTC transactions to hedge the price of energy fuels in order to continue to offer the best electric rate possible to our customers. APPA supports the clearing language in H.R. 3795 that provides an exemption from clearing for LSEs and end users. Specifically, requiring not-for-profit public power systems to clear would pose significant financial hardships to them and the local governments that own them, without addressing any of the systemic problems that caused the financial crisis in which we now find ourselves. Derivatives end users, such as public power systems, do not pose systemic risk to the market, as do the bank-to-bank exchanges for the purposes of profit-making. Therefore, derivative end users should not be subject to the same type of regulation as other entities.
If you could summarize, sir.
Thank you. Therefore, APPA and DMAC's perspective, from our perspective, a well-drafted bill will include provisions necessary to curb market manipulation while preserving FERC's primary jurisdiction over RTO markets, including the FTR markets, and preserving the ability of energy end users to use non-cleared OTC swaps to hedge against energy price volatility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Our next witness is an old friend, and And the year is winding down, and it's great to have another visit from Glenn English, our former colleague in the Congress, and the CEO of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. He served 10 terms in Congress representing the great state of Oklahoma, and is a great friend of our committee. And he spent the whole year now tutoring us on how rural America interacts with all of the major energy issues in our country. We thank you for that, and whenever you feel comfortable, please begin.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and being very mindful of the vote pressures that you're under, the committee's under, I'll try to move right along. I would ask that my entire written testimony be, make part of the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And also, as the chairman pointed out, electric cooperatives, of course, are very important to rural America. I am the CEO of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. We have 47 states in which we have some 930 co-ops, 42 million consumers. We're not-for-profit and consumer-owned, and we're very proud of that. So, as you can imagine, has been the case all this year, Mr. Chairman, our focus has been on the issue of affordability. And once again, I come to talk to you about the issue of affordability. First of all, I'd like to commend Chairman Peterson for the work that he has done, certainly increasing transparency and reducing systemic risk for end users. I think is extremely commendable. I think the legislation goes far in achieving these objectives. However, the subject of this hearing focuses on a very narrow area. And it's one that we have great concern over, and I know that this committee does, and I want to commend you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing and calling attention to this issue. We have what I think many of us are very familiar with, in which you have two federal agencies here that could potentially have jurisdiction over an area that is very sensitive. And I would point out to the committee, and I think most members of the committee are very aware of the fact, that certainly this is a very volatile, sensitive area when you talk about the movement of power in this country. And it's extremely important, as this committee has discussed many times, that power move freely and that it move in a timely fashion and it move in an affordable way. And in this particular area, I know of no problems that have occurred with regard to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in helping bring that about. I'm not familiar with any market manipulation issues that have arisen since 2005 and the legislation passed by this committee. And certainly I think that we all are very mindful that it's in all of our best interest, where we be for-profit or consumer-owned as a part of the electric utility industry, that we continue to make certain that the power in this country moves in an efficient manner. That's important to consumers, and it's certainly important to keep the lights on throughout this nation. So we become very concerned, Mr. Chairman, and that we have some questions that have arisen here of exactly how we're going to proceed. And this is something that troubles us a great deal. We would strongly suggest, Mr. Chairman, that as we talk about these transactions, both before the transaction takes place and during the period in which the transaction is being carried out, that we have one agency that focus on meeting those responsibilities, and that be the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, a very bright line can be painted after the transaction. There should be fair game for anyone on any wrongdoing, any market manipulation that is detected, whether it be the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission or the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Either way, we should encourage and hope that they root out any wrongdoing and they take those steps that are necessary to deal with it. But I think it's very important for us to keep in mind, Mr. Chairman, that we need one agency to focus on that very sensitive, critical period of time as to when these transactions are being carried out. And I know the chairman is very sensitive to time in this area as well, so I will wind up by simply saying I hope that you encourage the two federal agencies to come together, work with us, and work with the two committees in Congress in resolving this difficulty so that we don't have any interference taking place in this marketplace. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, as well. For, when did you leave, Glenn?
That was 1994.
Wow.
And we did have jurisdiction under my subcommittee of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission back in those days.
Remember that? Yeah,
Yeah.
long ago.
I'm afraid so. Very long. Oh, getting older, Mr. Chairman.
Our next witness is John Schelk. He is the president and CEO of the Electric Power Supply Association. That is the national trade association representing competitive power suppliers. And back when I was the chairman of this subcommittee in 1985 and 86, John was the chief counsel for the ranking member of the committee at the time, Carlos. We did the Appliance Efficiency Act that year. Carlos, the refrigerator Moorhead, and that was when, if you remember, William the Refrigerator Perry. Couldn't get a bigger and better nickname than that. But I don't know if you know this, but refrigerators now basically consume 50% less electricity for the same size device as they did in 1986. And so Mr. Schelk has, what, John?
It is a long time ago.
It is a long time ago. But we welcome you back, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate the invitation. As you indicated, EPSA represents competitive wholesale suppliers, including generators and marketers who do business both in the 2/3 of the country with organized markets and in the 1/3 without them. The competitive sector is 40% of U.S. generating capacity with an even greater role in the organized markets. As you kindly mentioned, for 10 years I had the honor of working for members of this committee, including on FERC matters, and more recently I've joined the CFTC's Energy and Environmental Markets Advisory Committee and fully support the transparency goals Chairman Gensler outlined to you this afternoon. The question is how to do so. Our position is that there is no more important issue to be acted upon by the Congress in the near future that will impact the electric sector than maintaining cost-effective access to OTC risk management products for all the reasons you've heard from the other panelists. We commend the CFTC for listening to our concerns, and we also appreciate changes to the original version of H.R. 3795 made by the Committees on Financial Services and Agriculture. However, for reasons that you've heard, three critical details remain. First, definitions should ensure access to OTC risk management products by those of us primarily managing commercial risks without imposing mandatory clearing due to how it would constrain our capital availability at a time when you rightly expect us to be investing in energy infrastructure of the future. Second, margin requirements should not apply to those who use OTC products to manage commercial risks for the same reason. And for focusing on what you've been focusing on this afternoon, we agree that a clear line should be drawn in the statutory language between the important responsibilities Congress assigns to the two agencies. Understandably, for those actually implicated in the financial crisis, the bill as it stands today defines what is within the CFTC's exclusive purview very broadly. However, as you've heard, this raises very serious questions as to FERC's exclusive regulation of wholesale markets, markets which were not implicated by the financial crisis, and we share those concerns. FERC's exclusive jurisdiction should be preserved by adding a provision to the bill that excludes any products transacted through or in reference to the RTOs and ISOs FERC regulates, and most importantly for my members who serve many of your constituents, these are the markets from which electricity suppliers receive the revenues necessary to operate and invest. As a result, electricity markets are systems that are physically and financially integrated so extensively, as this committee is well aware, as to sharply distinguish electricity from the corn and treasury bill examples you heard earlier. Thus, dual or coexisting regulation, while not impossible, is more problematic, hence the recommendation for a statutory bright line, because as you know, all of these things are interrelated. Physically, you can't pull them apart like you can corn and T-bills from the different agencies. For all the reasons you've heard that I won't belabor, RTOs and ISOs are subject to multiple layers of oversight. The extent of this oversight and the documented competitive market results that the organized markets produce to benefit consumers are ample evidence of the effectiveness of FERC's regulation that should be preserved. Unfortunately, the bill as it stands, as I mentioned, does not yet expressly and fully address this important issue. We strongly urge you to do so, to preserve FERC's jurisdiction over the organized markets on which a large and growing share of the country depends for its electricity. And again, we thank you for the invitation and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shelf, very much. Our final witness is Vincent Duane, General Counsel for PJM. That's Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland.
Originally, that's correct.
Right. The regional transmission organization that serves much of the Mid-Atlantic and parts of the Midwestern region of the country. So what other states are in now?
We are, Chairman, in 14 states, if you include the District of Columbia, 13 states in the District of Columbia, as far out west as Illinois, up to the New Jersey, New York border, down into North Carolina, and a good part of the country in between.
And they wouldn't want to be run by a group called Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland. So the name changes to protect, the
hence my reluctance
innocent
in agreeing with you on that. Hence my reluctance in agreeing with you on the original historical derivation.
Probably paid a consultant $100,000 to make that recommendation. So, he joined PJM in 2003 as Deputy General Counsel and has served as General Counsel since 2007. Have you ever been before this committee before?
This is my first time, sir.
First time. So we have a brand new witness. Welcome to our committee. And it's just great to have some new faces coming before us. So whenever you feel ready, please begin.
Well, again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Upton, and the rest of the committee members for the invitation to be here today. I am testifying on behalf of PJM, and I would request that the written testimony be included as part of the record.
Without objection, it will be so ordered.
Thank you very much. We are, as has been mentioned, a RTO, Regional Transmission Organization, and a public utility. That means we are regulated by the FERC. We perform several functions, and the one that is of most interest today is our function in administering organized wholesale electricity markets. We administer these markets for two reasons. First, we want to bring competitive forces to the transacting of wholesale purchases in the electricity markets, and we use them, and this is very important, as a tool to help us discharge our responsibility in managing the grid reliably. It's a tool that incents people, be they generators, transmission customers, and increasingly consumers and load interests, in responding to prices that result in behavior that keeps the grid reliable, basically helps us in our mission in keeping the lights on. But the markets are the focus today, and with particular attention being given to the FTR, Financial Transmission Right product that we administer in PJM. This product has caught the attention of the CFTC, I believe as part of its overall interest, as Chairman Gensler mentioned, in bringing oversight to the over-the-counter markets. My first point, and probably the most important point I want to make, is that the public policy, and they're very important public policy imperatives that are driving financial market reform, are simply not present when it comes to the RTO markets. It's not that we don't share in the objectives that Chairman Gensler mentioned, lowering risk, promoting transparency, and bringing integrity to the public. Absolutely do we endorse those risks. In fact, we feel we put those at the very front of our windshield. We just get to them, and we get to those objectives in a slightly different way. We are not an OTC environment. We are a centralized marketplace, and one that is pervasively, some would say intrusively, regulated by the FERC. Our markets are not opaque. It's hard to think of a more transparent environment than an RTO. Let's look at the FTR with particular reference here. When an FTR is bought and sold, the name of the holder of the FTR is publicly available. The price they pay for that FTR is publicly available. And the identity of the particular FTR pathway is publicly available. It's all available to market participants in the FTR markets on the PJM website. So there's no transparency issue. We get to that through the centralized markets regulated by the FERC. And the products are not synthetic financial products. Admittedly, they do settle financially, but they are very closely tied to the physical capability of the transmission system, and they're essential to our mission of delivering firm transmission to customers and ensuring that those customers have some degree of price certainty in moving their electricity from point A and point B. And these are missions that this committee and the Congress has squarely entrusted to the FERC. The second point I'd like to make is we are not, and we're quite distinct from sort of the financial institutions that operate in the OTC markets. We are a nonprofit entity. We don't make money on FTRs, and we don't have a structuring desk that's populated by PhD mathematicians devising exotic instruments, packaging them, and marketing them to other financial institutions. That's not what an FTR is all about. In fact, we have another function that I mentioned in my testimony where we are a transmission planner and we look at opportunities to expand the transmission system to remove congestion, to increase transfer capability, which is to say the ability to move electricity from one point to another, and in doing so, reduce the reliance on FTRs. So we're quite distinct from a financial institution that might be trying to market a product. We're in a sense trying to eliminate the need for, or at least lessen the reliance on the FTR product. The last point I'd like to make is to sort of answer the question I think is at the heart of this, which is, well, what is so wrong with having a dual role with the CFTC and the FERC, and why is this a matter that needs some statutory attention? And it's not just a desirability to bring clarity. It's not just to eliminate duplication, and dare I say, it's not just to avoid costs. It is really a question that the tools that the CFTC uses just are not a very good fit for the products and markets and environments that we operate. We get to those objectives through different mechanisms and don't see the same need to get to the risks that have been identified. I'd like to close on that point, make myself available for questions.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it, Mr. Twain. The chair will now recognize himself for some questions. Ms. Moeller, your position is that FERC should have exclusive authority over RTO products and services. That's a much more aggressive position than Mr. Waxman and I and Mr. Upton and Mr. Barton have taken. We basically say let's preserve FERC's authority, and where there is overlapping authority, let the FERC and the CFTC work it out. Why is your approach better, in your opinion?
My concern is born of the language in the bills that have gone through the two other committees. Under the Commodity Exchange Act, if the CFTC has jurisdiction over a transaction, it supplants other agencies' jurisdiction. They have exclusive jurisdiction. And I do not understand, having negotiated a number of memoranda of understanding when I was at FERC and when I was Deputy Secretary of Energy, how one agency that has preemptive authority over transactions that are currently regulated by another agency, how those two agencies can successfully negotiate a memorandum of understanding. So if you give the CFTC authority over, or if they claim authority over things like financial transmission rights, that trumps FERC's authority and FERC's ability, at least arguably, and FERC's ability to allocate transmission rights and the like. And I worry about that. I understand that they have, under the Energy Policy Act of 2005, authority to look at fraud and manipulation, but they wouldn't have anything to do with those transactions. That's why I am not as comfortable with the MOU approach.
Okay, great. Mr. English, what would be the practical impacts on consumers and your members if FERC's authority over financial transmission rights and other RTO products were eliminated as a result of the pending bill?
I think the problem is we don't know, Mr. Chairman. We have an agency that really is not equipped to regulate these markets, and certainly that would raise questions, I think, about, as I mentioned earlier, a very volatile marketplace and how well it would work. So I have serious questions whether it would work.
Great. Mr. Schelk.
As I indicated, these are the markets from which we receive the revenue on which we rely to operate and invest. So our concern would be, depending on what aspects of the RTOs and the ISO markets the CFTC might consider under its purview. And as Ms. Moeller said, this is the later enacted statute. So if it stands as it is today, you'd be subsequently basically reaffirming and even strengthening the CFTC's role, which would raise concerns in our minds about the revenue streams we depend on.
Great. And Mr. McCullough.
We heard the two chairmen discussing the very issue, and it's our position that FERC should maintain primary jurisdiction in these markets. But CFTC can be helpful in an oversight mode, and frankly, combining resources to deal with these problems could only help the markets and the consumers.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Duane, what changes would be made if PJM had to adhere to the principles in place under the Commodities Exchange Act as a derivative clearing organization? What effect would those requirements have on the marketplace?
Let me first state I'm not sure we would be able to comply with those directives. Again, those directives are designed to promote transparency, to limit lower risk, and to preserve the integrity of markets. That's well and good, and those are objectives that we share, that the FERC shares as well. We just use different tools to do that. If we were forced, somewhat akin to a square peg into a round hole, I'm very concerned that the products themselves wouldn't survive. Alternatively, there would be sort of qualification given to such a degree that I'm not sure anything will have improved or changed. We've got what we've got today. It's workable. I think that's the answer to the question.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Duane, very much. My time has expired. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say, as I listen to the testimony of all 5 witnesses, it really does seem like we're at Fox News, fair and balanced. Everyone was on the same page, including Mr. Engel, a former Ag Committee member, right? Right? Indeed. Have you talked to Mr. Peterson, Chairman Peterson, about this? Is anyone here?
The CFTC, by the way, has its own channel one floor down.
I know.
That it can turn to.
Is anyone here? I should ask anyone here in the audience from Ag Committee? Going once? No hands? Okay.
Well, as Mr. Upton, as I pointed out, I have high praise for Chairman Peterson. And
I know you do.
Work at
I know you
It's
do.
just this one little narrow area that he It's not much. Just a little tweaking here and there would take care of the problem.
Yeah. You know, Mr. Wellenoff, Chairman Wellenoff, in one of his answers, talked about uncertainty creates more risk, and clearly, I think that's what this 3795 really does. It does need to be maybe a little more than tweaked, but it needs to be fixed. There's an old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But in fact, I think this would really send us back. And the bottom line would be that the extra burden would probably increase rates for most of America. I know PJM, I thought stood for Michigan in this thing, but that's all right. But the burden would, in fact, have the potential of increasing rates for all consumers. Does anyone disagree with that? Right? So, you know, the electric industry is unified, right? Is there anyone else that's not on the same page? Any major organization that's not with your testimony, right?
And as you know, that's a unique development in our history. The fact that we're unified.
We're still working on cap and trade to make sure we get people back in the corral. Well, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I just want to say I appreciate your testimony, and I look forward to working with Chairman Markey and Waxman and Barton to fix this problem before it gets to the House floor, because it will increase rates, and that is the last thing that, you know, as I look at Michigan's economy, but the nation as well, we don't need this. We really don't need this.
Mr. Upton, several earlier participants have mentioned an analysis that Exelon has done by looking at what would happen if our types of transaction were required to be cleared. And our analysis shows a rate increase of between 5 and 15%. With your permission, I would like to put an example or two in the record that shows how we came up with those numbers based on just some real typical kinds of power transactions. And
without objection, so what? Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have no further questions,
Beautiful.
so I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. And the chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, once again, Mr. Stupak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry I missed the testimony. I had to take another meeting. But I've been asking, the last panel asked about the swap clearing for end users. So let me ask this question this way. Bona fide hedgers are participating in the derivatives market for commercial purposes and really are not the cause of our excessive speculation, as I call it, in the energy markets. Electric utilities are not the cause of our current financial crisis. However, in the legislation, exemption from a swap clearing for end users also allows large financial institutions that serve as your counterparties to also remain off the hook for stricter oversight. So my question was this, and whoever wants to chime in, please do. Would you support a change in the legislation that allows a bona fide hedgers, including electric utilities, to remain exempt from clearing requirements, but mandating the Tier 1 financial companies clear their swap transactions on a regulated market? Go ahead, Glenn. Looks like you're ready to go.
Our concern still is the fact, we're very small. And certainly whenever you look at the size of these markets, you can't hardly see us with a magnifying glass. But these are very important markets to us to hedge our risk. We don't have the kind of capital at hand to be able to handle a great deal of risk, and it really puts us in a bind off of this. Anything that would increase those costs, I think, are going to push our people out of those markets, and it increases risk to our members considerably.
But if we exempt you out and let your counterpart, though, still regulate that?
That the key word here is what kind of impact is that going to have
on you
overall cost?
Yeah.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, we support Mr. Stupak's interest in transparency. The question is, how do you do it? And the concern with the Tier 1 provision is that, as Chairman Gensler indicated, most of our counterparties are the larger banks, so they can be.
Correct.
So under the version that you've suggested, essentially, the Tier 1 bank wouldn't post the collateral. We would have to post the collateral as the counterparty to the Tier 1 institution. And as I indicated earlier, the problem with that is it would tie up, in the examples we've come up with, about an average a quarter of the capital of the end user. So we fully agree with your comments that the electric utilities and other generators didn't cause the problem. We think the way to get to your transparency goal, which we share because we're in the market too, is to have a data repository so that the information on these trades would be available to the CFTC and others. And the problem with electricity is it's very customized. These products are traded over hundreds of different nodes around the country, so it doesn't really lend itself, the CFTC doesn't lend itself to the corn example and the T-bill example and the kinds of commodities that the chairman indicated.
Yeah, well, what we're trying to get to is these large pools coming in and driving up those prices. And even if they are your counterpart, they still fluctuate.
That's why we agree with you.
Yeah.
It wouldn't help us, so we would like to see the data repository as the way to put on a bulletin board to the CFTC. They would know what's happening in these markets, whereas Chairman Gensler said today they don't. I think that would get at what you're trying to accomplish.
Mr. Stupak, there are lots of estimates floating around about how much this costs, but if you require these transactions to be cleared on exchange, they have margin requirements. And we're talking billions of dollars of additional cost to our sector. And if you can't just exempt Exelon or PECO or ComEd or DTE or anything, but not their counterparty, because if their counterparty has to go through the clearing process, then that drags the reluctant counterparty with them. To both parts of if one is subject to it, then both parts of the transaction get subject to it, and that's where the costs come from. So yes, I understand it may not be popular to think about exempting some of the large investment houses, but they are our counterparties, and we need these markets to be robust. Deep liquid is the phrase that our guys always use, but that's the way we save our customers money.
But also what's led to our financial meltdown a little bit too.
Not with these kinds of products. The housing derivatives and mortgage securities, et cetera, but I don't think that you find that transactions for FERC RTO markets and hedging instruments used by our sector have been part of that problem.
Well, I think Mr. Waxman might disagree with that after the California electrical debacle. And again, I'm not saying you caused it, but when you got that much money moving around, and as quickly it's moving around, that's where your excess speculation comes in. And so how do we do it that keeps you who are bona fide hedger? You're bona fide. But these other folks coming in with this money, they're not bona fide. They're in there just to make money. And as long as if they're not clearing anywhere, and maybe the data repository is a place to look at. I'm not quite sure. I'm still saying make them clear. I'm still wrestling with that one.
If I could offer a comment that may give some comfort here.
Please do it quickly, because there are roll calls that are about to.
We work in the light in our industry. It's very open, it's very transparent. And when we have these counterparties, we require them to come into the light with us. And especially public power systems, we're community-owned systems. We would not participate as a counterparty in something that was not in the light and transparent. I think that should give comfort.
Gentlemen, the former police officer from Michigan's time has expired. Former state trooper. He prefers that everything be in the light as a former state trooper. Works better for crime prevention and detection. The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just ask for the whole panel, if I know a few of you made some different remarks about this in your statements, but if you could each say first if you do think there would be any increases to consumers by this legislation, and if so, what rough percentage? And if you could just go across, starting with Ms. Mueller.
Yes, and our best estimate is somewhere between 5 to 15% to have a clearing requirement.
Thanks.
Thank you. And from our point of view, it would be at least a 5% increase in cost of operations, and those costs would have to be passed on to the consumers.
And looking at the issue that we're talking about today, we have a major concern of the law of unintended consequences. Anytime you leave a hole open with this kind of a question, you're likely to have increased cost and unintended consequences.
Short answer is yes, for all the reasons you've heard.
From the RTO perspective, it would frustrate programs that are essential to the delivery of services to our customers. That would increase costs and perhaps take away programs altogether.
Okay, and earlier we talked too about capital and how this may tie up capital that would make it more difficult for companies to become more energy efficient. Can each of you just briefly touch on that as well?
I agree with Mr. Shelk's earlier observations on that subject. We're, like all businesses these days, we are very careful where we put our capital. If we have to put it all in margin requirements, we won't be able to do other new projects, transmission projects, new generation. We're building a solar project in South Chicago. The money there wouldn't be there.
I agree with Ms. Mueller's statement. It's a capital-constrained environment now, for all the reasons we know. This would only aggravate that situation.
And I also agree, but I also think that it could have the additional complication of the flow of power in this country.
And the important thing about the capital is not only the amount, it's the uncertainty, because you have to post margin in the beginning and as the transaction continues over time. So it's not just the amount, which in and of itself is significant, but it's also the fact that it would change over time. Again, we think unnecessarily we can accomplish the transparency goals that Mr. Stupak understandably wants to achieve without having to tie up roughly a quarter of each company's capital in the clearinghouse to get the transparency that you should want.
And again, from the RTO perspective and the FTR is essential to assist people in long-term contracting. Long-term contracting provides a stream of revenue necessary to support capital formation and investment of any technology. So yes, again, if the program is threatened, the whole unintended consequence flows through the whole system.
Thanks. And then I'll just throw this one out there for anybody that wants to take it. Do you believe that some market participants would cease hedging exposure if clearing were mandatory due to the increased costs associated with exchange trading? And if that were the case, would that even bring more risk into the market, if anybody wants to?
Yes, as far as electric cooperatives are concerned, we wouldn't have a choice.
Yeah, the capital-constrained public power systems would basically be priced out of using those tools, and it would impact our customers.
We use hedging to level out the prices we charge our customers. If we can't hedge, we're going to charge them more. And we will also be less likely to enter into long-term contracts.
Short answer is yes, it would.
The only point I'll add is to remind everyone here that electricity is an extraordinarily volatile commodity, and the ability to hedge that price volatility is essential.
And, of course, benefits consumers. I appreciate all of your candor, and I yield back.
Great. The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan. You, Mr. Chairman, would be the last member recognized to ask questions.
You're forcing me to think to give back the balance.
I thank the chair for that, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for their testimony today. The hearing has underscored the need for the derivatives bill reported out of the House Agriculture Committee to be modified so it does not interfere with the ability of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to oversee electricity and natural gas markets. We've heard about the potential for the bill to disrupt the RTOs, as well as mechanisms used by many RTOs. These include financial transmission rights used to hedge the volatility of transmission prices, forward capacity markets used to ensure that there is sufficient generation capacity, and potentially demand-side energy management programs. We've also heard about the potential for this legislation to exacerbate an existing dispute over the reach of the FERC's anti-fraud and anti-manipulation authorities. Clearly, we need to correct these problems and work with the members who have come here today on a bipartisan basis, and with the witnesses who have been gracious enough to come here today to testify as expert witnesses. So we thank you all, and with that, and the thanks of the committee, this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.